Welcome, y'all. It's Wes with DIY Food Plot Pro. Thank you so much for joining us. On today's episode, we are going to talk about the dove field that I planted about 6 weeks ago. I'm going to show you some things that have happened out here, some good things, some bad things, show you everything in between like I always do on the channel. If you don't know, my name is Wes. I run the channel DIY Food Plot Pro. I've got a Bachelor of Science in Agronomy. I farm for a living, and I've got an 1,800-acre deer hunting outfitter in Western Kentucky where we cannot bait. So we rely heavily on food plots to feed the whitetails that we are blessed to hunt here in Western Kentucky. 6 weeks ago, I worked this ground, conventional till with a disc, just scratched it lightly. I put 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That's not 100 pounds of 3400, that's 100 pounds total of nitrogen out here per acre. I planted it. We got a tremendous amount of rain. We had a lot of crows out here and a lot of blackbirds. They were eating this stuff up quick. So I was really fortunate that I didn't leave the seed on top of the ground. I did lightly disc the sunflowers in, and I think that's the reason why this is a successful plot. You can see the sunflowers are about waist high right now. They're starting to get flowers in the top. They kind of have a yellowish look to them. I feel very confident that these sunflowers right now are nitrogen deficient. I put out plenty of nitrogen for them. 100 pounds should be a big plenty of nitrogen for these sunflowers to produce. That should give them all the nitrogen they need to produce that year. The issue was, as I've told many of you, nitrogen leaches out of the soil. And when I planted these things, basically right up until we planted these things, we were in about average rainfall. Since then, for about a month, we have been way yonder above average rainfall. We've got multiple rains that were over 3-4 inches, and it has rained very, very regularly. So what's happened is this nitrogen has washed out of the soil, and there's not enough nitrogen left to really be able to finish this thing out. Now it's going to go ahead and keep on going, and it's going to be okay. It's just not going to be that dark green that what we're looking for. And likely the heads are going to be a little bit smaller than what they otherwise would have if it had plenty of nitrogen. Now many of you might ask, Wes, why don't you just throw some more nitrogen on it? The issue is nitrogen is going to burn this, okay? And 2 weeks ago, before it started really yellowing, I could have done that, and I would have burned some leaves, but it would have been okay. But right now, these flowers are kind of like this. So if I just take a broadcast and I'm just broadcasting urea on top of it, it wouldn't take much more. I would say 20-30 pounds of N would be plenty to finish this off with. That urea is going to sit down in that flower, and it's going to burn that flower up. So it wouldn't kill all of them by any means, but it would be really, really hard on them, and I don't want that. So I would rather just go on like we are. I think we'll be okay. I think we'll have a little bit smaller head sizes than normal, but we'll wait and see on that for sure. I do have a cornfield right behind you, and even though it's been tremendously hot down here, we've had a lot of north wind, which is from your direction blowing to me. And so I do have a little bit of chemical damage from either the cornfield behind you or the soybean field behind you. Just some yellowing, not a big deal. It's a really small spot in the field, but I do have a little bit of chemical damage. Black oil sunflowers don't have any chemical resistance. So chemicals are pretty hard on them. Any form of chemical is pretty hard on them. So one thing that I really did want to talk about was the lack of deer pressure out here because of our system that we used. That worked really, really well. The whitetails have really not been out here. I've seen a few and I've been able to spook them off, but by and large, we've clearly been able to raise a successful sunflower crop in a high density deer zone. The most important thing I want to talk to you about was the pre-emergent herbicide, dual Magnum. That has been around many, many years, and it is an excellent pre-emerge herbicide in a lot of food plots. So it's fairly cheap, and I am shocked how well it has worked. This is 6 weeks, and we are finally beginning to get just a little bit of grass and a little bit of weeds showing up. But that's it. I mean, this plot is largely in very, very, very good shape. The grass I'm not worried about at all. that's going to just provide more food for the doves during that September-October season that we have here in Western Kentucky. And there is going to be a big plenty of food here, but I am shocked how well this chemical program has worked. And I'm in a little thicker area right here, and this is what we're looking for on all our crops. It's called Canopy, okay? So I don't know if you can see this or not. Basically what's happened is there's so many sunflowers here in this one area, and they've got all their leaves spread out. They're blocking the sun from hitting the ground. What happens with that is you don't have weeds and grass coming because they can't get any sunlight to grow. So this is what we call full canopy, and this is achieved in almost every food plot, whether it's brassicas, corn, soybeans, alfalfa, clover. Canopy is what you're looking for. Canopy is your friend because it's going to hold that grass and weed pressure down. And basically what you're wanting to do when you're planting a lot of these annual crops is you're wanting to have that pre-emergent herbicide down so that these things get big enough that they form that canopy. Not going to say you're not going to have a blade of grass or a weed come through that canopy, but by and large, if you are completely canopied over, you're not going to have very many weeds or grasses in that area. It's too thick and the sunlight can't get down there. So that's what we're looking for. A really good question that I had when I was planting this plot, and I posted the last video, a guy was asking me about the pre-emerge. You know, obviously what I did is I disked this field, and then I sowed it with my broadcast seeder, and then I went back and I lightly disked on top of the ground to cover those, just barely trying to get them in less than 1/2 of an inch. And then I went directly after that to my shop and I got my dual Magnum and I did it exactly by the label, and I sprayed right over the top of that seed that's buried in the ground. And one of my viewers reached out and he said, hey, how does that not hurt that sunflower? As long as it's labeled for it. That's the most important thing, is read these labels. So a pre-emergent basically forms a blanket down. And one really important note about pre-emergence require rainfall to activate. So you need a rainfall pretty quickly after that. Luckily we were getting plenty of rain that time. It activated just fine. But all pre-emergents are different, and pre-emergents target different things. Some target grass, some target weeds, some target both. Dual Magnum is really good at grass and small seeded broadleaves, okay? So basically what that means is it's not gonna affect the sunflowers. When we planted these, we were able to spray Dual Magnum right behind the cedar, and it didn't hurt them at all. They came right on through it, but it held all the grass. It held a lot of the pigweeds for a pretty good while from coming up. And that's a huge thing. Pre-emergents are gigantic in food plots. That helps you. If you're not using pre-emergents and you're just using Roundup, Roundup's just a contact. So you're just killing what's there. You've got a whole other generation coming behind them. Or a pre-emerge, it almost acts like a blanket that you put down that's going to prevent those weeds and grasses from coming up. So I use pre-emerge in sunflowers, corn, soybeans. I use it a ton, and I'm really, really tickled with it. This is a product that's not super expensive, but I think a lot of food plotters would benefit a lot more to use pre-emergence like I did here. I definitely have some thin spots out here, some spots like this where it's probably too thick. Still going to make a seed head. Obviously, it's already one here, but then I've got a lot of places where it's a little bit on the thin side to suit me, and I've got more grass and I've got more pigweed pressure in those areas. If I was to do this all over again, what I would do is I would take my 50-pound bag of black oil sunflowers that I planted on this 2.5 acres, and I would have germ tested that to see what rate that's going to be. I think that's going to vary a whole lot from year to year. I don't think you could do that one year and then plan on that for the next year. I would definitely do that differently, and I would make sure that I knew what my germ was. And I spread these a little too thick. It didn't look like I hardly had any coming out of the cedar, but I actually had more coming out than what I expected. And I've got several runs where it's thick, and then I was starting to run out, and so I closed it down some. So I've got some areas that are too thick, some areas that are too thin. But for a dove plot, I am tickled to death with it. I think it's going to do really, really well for us. It's going to do what we need to do anyway. and provide the doves some food. And this is a plot that's fairly easy to grow. There's not a whole lot to it. You don't need a ton of equipment for it. Use a planter as well, but I broadcast these in, and they did well for what we need to do. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Y'all smash that like and subscribe button.